Your Highness Abdullah bin Hamad Al Thani, Deputy Emir, Your Excellency Sheikh Abdullah bin Nasser Al Thani, Prime Minister, Minister of the Interior, Your Excellencies, Ministers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, may the blessings of God be upon you all. In the midst of all the events in our area and the storms we and the current security conditions, the Gulf Summit arrives to Doha in light of all these good changes, and this conference organized by the Arab Center for Studies and Research. All of this is on the eve of Gulf GCC summit, which is only 3 days away from us now, with all the international and regional interest it generates and what the region is going through of the repercussions of the different events. We here in this conference are concerned with inter-Gulf issues, and a group of distinguished politicians, thinkers, decision makers, and experts take part, and we look forward to their intake on these themes. I don't want to take too much of your time. I invite Mr. Mohammed Jamal from the Arab Center for Research and Studies to deliver his opening remarks. Your Highness Sheikh Abdullah bin Hamad Al Thani, Deputy Emir, Your Excellency Abdullah bin Nasser bin Khalifa Al Thani, Prime Minister and Minister of the Interior, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, on behalf of the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies, I would like to welcome you to the opening ceremony of the GCC countries' politics and economics in light of the regional and international shifts and changes conference, which is this year we are celebrating the 3rd anniversary of, and in an attempt to enhance relations and interaction between the different study centers. The first session focused on the geostrategic changes in light of the Arab revolutions, and the second focused on the Palestinian issue, and this one will be focusing on the GCC countries' politics and economics in the light of the regional and international shifts and changes. These conferences are of scientific nature, and the center has attempted to provide room for exchange between academicians, experts, and political practitioners and policy makers in a way which will provide for the academicians the kind of experience and expertise which will allow them to enhance their analysis, and a large number of experts are taking part. The centers are more than 70, in fact, and the number of participants in the conference is 127 experts, and for this reason, we devised this conference to be on 2 tracks. This tradition of annual conferences for Arab research centers is part and parcel of the scientific tradition which our center has been trying to establish. And in September of each year, we hold another conference on democratization and democratic change. And the third and last conference focused on the issue of sectarianism, minority rights in the Levant. Expected that the fourth conference will focus on violence and political activity in societies. We consider this conference an important landmark in the work of our conference. We have held 3 sessions so far, and we hope to hold the fourth one in March of next year in Morocco. During this conference, it's customary to announce the awards by the Arab Center. And next year's theme will be the role of education in the Arab world, and the different activities we hold in this center emanate from our vision at a time of change, because Renaissance is a continuous procedure, and its questions have not been dealt with properly and finally. We therefore try and provide the kind of legacy that today a number of experts and in the fields of computerization, and we hope that we will provide a dictionary for and with an electronic version. We hope that other more specialized dictionaries and encyclopedia will be developed. In addition to this work, now we are intensifying our efforts to establish the Doha Institute for Postgraduate or Higher Education to develop research in arts, humanities, and management. We expect that the autumn of 2015 will see the inauguration of this institute with 2 programs in arts and humanities, and also political sciences and economics. We expect a total number of students between 350 to 400 MA students, and gradually we will offer PhD courses also, and with that the opportunity to Arab researchers to produce ideas at 2 levels. One at the level of a visiting researcher, and another research award program. And as for this will be an opportunity for all Arab researchers, and it will be, in addition to this work, the center will focus on policy analysis and as to what's happening in the Arab world, to produce the kind of analyses of policies, and will be published on our electronic website. If Doha is to be the headquarters of the center, which could not have been established without the support of Qatar, but at the same time we will have branches in Beirut, Tunisia, and Washington, and linked through a series of memorandum of understanding with other respectable, renowned universities in Morocco, Algeria, Sudan, and other places. The center is working on expanding its program of activities. In this context, I would like to avail myself of this opportunity to go through the list of the activities that the center has been engaged in for the last four years. We published three periodicals on the cultural and political talk, and Imran on the social sciences, and Siyasat Arabiya. And the Siyasat Arabiya is a monthly magazine, okay, and it is here, okay. And next year we will publish the first issue of Istishraf and in addition to these magazines, we have a unit for translation under the title of Turjuman, which is to translate different reference books in the hope of and the ambition to serve the cultural interaction. And in this context, we have the publications department, publishing department, which will be peer received, and we have published more than 100 titles so far, and only this year we have received over 240 transcripts, and we hope that this work will continue, and we are trying for the third year running to publish the Arab Index after two previous versions, in which we conducted surveys in 14 different Arab communities, and according to the highest standards to gauge public opinion of Arab citizens vis-à-vis the issues concerning them. And we are proud to present representative samples of Arab communities, and each year we deal with more than 20,000 respondents, and these views constitute a wealth of information which is documented and reliable information and database, both for the benefit of public and policymakers. On this occasion, we would like to thank the Emir of Qatar for all the support he provides our center to develop its work. I thank you once again and welcome you to this conference, and may the blessings of God be upon
قدمني
يا أخي نسيت peer review أريد أتذكره.
قدمني اللي جاي بس قدمني اسمه.
Thank you very much, Your Highness, Deputy Emir. Maybe GCC, despite all that is being said about it, remains the only surviving Arab attempt of unity for the last 35 years, despite all the tremendous events from the invasion of Kuwait and the liberation of Kuwait, then the American invasion of Iraq, until we ended up with the current complex situation in more than one country, which we're currently witnessing. The experience of the GCC countries is the title of the paper that His Excellency Rahman al-Attiyah, the former Secretary General of the GCC, will be delivering now.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
In the name of God, the Beneficent, the Merciful, Sheikh Abdullah bin Hamad, the Deputy Emir, and ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to address you today at the beginning of the third annual conference of the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies. To start with, I'd like to greet the organizers for choosing the policies and economics, given the changes in the international arena. I'm not going to give a historical review of the GCC, but I will put forward a number of points through the interactions in the past and the challenges of the past. Whoever reads the reality of the GCC since the establishment of the GCC will find that there are lots of achievements which have been made and there are ones that are underway. The first challenge, the phenomenon of terrorism, the climate that's prevalent in the region with all its challenges, with the escalation and increase of terrorism in its various guises and forms, and religious extremism, as well as political extremism, would call for further diagnosis of the causes in order to identify the problems and the impact of that phenomenon on our societies. It is only too obvious that terrorism is receiving a lot of attention in the GCC countries, given the hot crises in the region and the neighboring countries such as Syria, Iraq, and as also the control of terrorist extremist organizations controlling vast areas in the region, and also the escalation of the roles of the militias, which are sectarian militias that are dominating the situation in a number of Arab societies, threaten thereby their cohesion and threatening as well the possibility that they are pushing it into failed states, and also that the calculations for the challenge of terrorism represented by Daesh, the IS, and Al-Qaeda, especially given that Al-Qaeda is well established in Yemen and the IS, Islamic State, has announced its objectives unequivocally, which shows threatening the security situation and enhancing those countries, pushing them to become more stable. Also, it shows that no Gulf country is far removed from the dangers and the risks that are witnessed in neighboring countries, as in Yemen and others. And the role of the Houthi movement is obvious and raising criticisms in Yemen and regionally and internationally. I'd like to point out here that the latest evidence which shows the priority of the security dimension, which is reflected in the outcomes and findings of meetings of the GCC and Ministers of Interior, that emphasize the need for stability and security and protecting the national gains. On the other hand, I see in this context the necessity of involving specialists and experts to discuss the means of protecting youth from the phenomenon of extremism in an open world. The third challenge is a challenge of identity, that the national identity in the GCC countries are facing major challenges, foremost amongst which the immigrant workers and the high percentage of those ones in the demographic makeup, and also the constitute an element that threatening the national identity in some GCC countries. A large proportion of this immigrant labor, lack experience, and they are in the mainly consumption area. And I would point out the decision taken by the GCC ministers and representatives of 12 Asian countries exporting immigrant labor in a meeting that has been held recently in Kuwait, enforcing the rights of immigrant labor, and that's a positive development for the GCC in the face of large-scale criticisms from human rights organizations. The meeting allowed a weekly leave holiday, and allowing them to stay outside the areas of the sponsor if that's decided. These decisions are important because human rights have become major headlines and major themes determining the policy in international relations. The second challenge related to unemployment, youth unemployment. There are increasing numbers of citizens in the GCC countries who are looking for jobs, which would require the need to diagnosis of this problem and finding national solutions at the level of the GCC as well, and also implementing the decisions of the GCC, the relevant decisions, making available opportunities for work for young people, taking into account the importance of the outcome of education and its suitability for the employment needs, and also attaching importance to the educational process and also carrying out the development in the educational that will meet the demands of the labor market. And the third challenge related to economic cooperation, the enhancement of the economic integration among the GCC countries in the recent years led to a greater cohesion among those countries with the announcement of the establishment of the custom agreement and the common market and the monetary union among these countries, and eventually leading to the common currency, and also the integration of electric grids is one of the main developments achieved by the Council since establishment, and also the GCC has started a program of the railway network. And it's important here that the demands of citizenship are fulfilled to be in a streamlined fashion, which becomes obvious in the transport, freedom of movement, trade, and also investment, health, and services, with enhancement the participation of women in the comprehensive development to achieve the requirements of citizenship in the Gulf region. In this framework, I see there is a need for speeding up the establishment of the judicial body that was stipulated, the economic agreement of the GCC, and also attaching more credibility to the decisions in economic development and integration. And some people compare two experiences of the Gulf GCC and the European Union, but we see two different approaches here for work and for measurement. And also I put an aspect of that comparison in the institutions of the European Union, which have supranational competence, allowing them of issuing decisions having the force of laws and are binding for all the member countries. The other challenge is development of structures and organizations. The system of the GCC, which has been in existence for 3 decades, now needs a review and modernization in order to meet the requirements and the new developments witnessed by the GCC, and also giving the General Secretariat more competence to move freely and act more effectively with a view to contributing to speeding up the pace of common work and cooperation to reach the desired integration. The third challenge and mechanism for the decision-making, the GCC, and this mechanism can be looked at from 2 angles. The first of which is the process of taking the decision, the second of which related to steps of implementation which follow the decisions that are taken, and it's noticeable that many decisions need to be translated in real practice, and also action programs for implementing them, including, of course, the follow-up of implementation on the part of the member countries, especially that the General Secretariat of the GCC hasn't got the necessary mandate or the competence or the regulatory role as enjoyed, for example, by the European Commission. The third challenge is related to the issues of reform and political development. The countries of the GCC have recognized for a number of years that the process of development, economic and social development, should be accompanied by a political modernization, bringing forth a formula for cooperation and consultation between the leaders and the citizens. And this area has been put forward for a number of years and very clearly but it seems that the momentum of this attention has receded because of the challenges and development witnessed by the region or a number of other related issues. It's my conviction that the requirements, modern requirements and modernization requirements, make it necessary for the GCC to try to achieve a comprehensive reform through legislations meeting the demands and aspirations of citizens and also complying with the needs of the modern age. Given the challenges, the regional, international challenges, including the human rights issue, which is one of the requirements that have become one of the tools in the system of international relations. And in this respect, I would call for the effective participation of intellectuals and thinkers, and also including young people, women, and civil society organizations, to bring forth visions and suggestions to solve the problems of the GCC with a view to enhancing more integration and cohesion and following, obviously, the pulse of the citizens in those countries. And as for the eighth challenge, is the development of the institutional component of the GCC. This is an essential component where the recent events have showed the need of advancing the pillars and the institutions of the GCC to solve any problems and different visions. It's true that the wisdom of the leaders made it possible for the region to avoid many challenges and problems in various stages, but there have been some disagreements, but the wisdom of the leaders has always been there and is necessary given the social integration, the pulse of the one GCC family, one of which was embodied in the unity of the GCC countries and the recent meeting in Riyadh. However, the logic of the modern age requires an institutional approach, and I think this doing this and implementing it is a necessary, urgent requirement so to protect the work of the GCC and developments from any changes and storms. And the importance in this respect that the visions should be wide enough to include many attempts and many ideas within the framework of the general interests. As for the regional challenges, the foremost among which is the path of the Gulf Iranian relations, which needs more understanding and measures for confidence, building confidence and achieving the common interest, because the realities of history and geography cannot be ignored. That the strategic, long-term strategic view means resorting to dialogue and mutual respect as a means of resolving problems. And Iran has to reciprocate that with tangible steps, including solving the problem of the three islands, the Emirates Islands, either through bilaterally or through arbitration, international arbitration. And if, with your permission, in conclusion, I would greet the leader who's always been supporting the path of GCC and its role, and now giving me the problem to become the General Secretary. I'm standing in respect and awe of the father, Emir Sheikh Hamad bin Thani, who's always been a staunch supporter of the path with his vision. And if I have been successful with in implementing all these mission as a Secretary General of the GCC, then all the credit after God goes to His Highness the Emir, and also Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, the Emir. His Highness the Emir also is following the same path of renewal of the vision of youth and with the pulse of modernity and the modern age and the realities and facts of history and geography and the national values and the strong relations in the GCC countries, which builds and does not working on the construction and building. And we are working, we are sure, we have all confidence in His Highness the Emir that his presidency and the efforts of the leaders will be a landmark in the history of this country and the region. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Your Excellency Abdul Rahman bin Hamad Al Attiyah. The GCC today is living amongst an area surrounded by what can be called a fire belt of crises, escalating crises, wars, conflict. And in order to protect this entity of the Gulf Cooperation Council, it's not enough any longer to protect the borders, but the fires should be extinguished before they reach our countries. The role of the GCC in approaching these issues and lessons learned from the Yemeni crisis is our next paper by Mr. Jamal Benomar, the Special Envoy of the Secretary General of the United Nations to the Yemen. May the blessings of God be upon you all. Your Excellency, Your Highness, Sheikh Abdullah bin Hamad Al Thani, Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. From the outset, I would like to convey to you our deepest gratitude for allowing me the opportunity to speak before this distinguished gathering and to speak on the future role of the Gulf Cooperation Council in view of the current events and as a UN envoy to the UN and our continued effort over the last 3 years. I would like to present before you some ideas on how the GCC can develop its role in mediation and avoiding conflict and contributing to peacemaking and peace building. I will also allude to some means that may enable the GCC and the United Nations to enhance their cooperation and partnership. The UN has always recognized the role of regional organizations in dispute settlement through peaceful means. The eighth chapter of the Charter of the UN allows for such a role. The role of the regional organizations has been enhanced in the last 2 decades, especially when it comes to peace and security efforts. The regional arrangements has seen an increase in number, especially the ones focusing on economic integration more than achieving peace and stability and security. At the end of the 80s decade, we saw a number of these organizations like the EU, the African Union, and the Latin American countries, and the Asia Pacific, and the West Africa group of and Southern African group of countries, etc. With the beginning of the 90s, the kind of conflicts have started to change, and their impact has been increasing. This has impacted some fragile states and communities which suffered from division and disarray. In view of these events, the regional organizations resorted to developing their approach in dealing with these conflicts which started threatening peace and stability. Some describe this phenomena as a distinguishing mark of what was called the new regionalism at the time. And this, in the last few years, made the regional organizations intensify their efforts in dispute settlement. Some have even developed some early warning systems to deal with conflicts once they started. Therefore, the role of these organizations has increased, and it was not only in the field of dispute settlement, it went beyond that to impose sanctions and even by military means. This phenomena has been highlighted even more through some measures and steps taken by the African Union, the European Union, NATO, and the Operation for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Instead, the Security Council has strived to enhance cooperation between regional organizations or with regional organizations, and this has taken the shape of providing support similarly to the military operations conducted in Congo and also joint deployment of forces or through financing some peacekeeping missions. On other occasions, the UN has taken part with a UN mandate, has taken part in operations similarly to the role they played in Sudan and ISAF in Afghanistan. Also, there's been joint efforts similarly to what has taken place in Haiti in the aftermath of the crisis there. In Africa, the UN has been working shoulder to shoulder in the Darfur region, Somalia, and in 2005, a peace agreement has been signed in Darfur with the help of the UN and other partners. This agreement was renewed in Doha through the leading role played by the state of Qatar, and as a result of which some factions joined the agreement, and there has been cooperation with West African countries in the Ivory Coast and Mali. As for the Middle East and North Africa, the UN has been cooperating with the Arab League to solve the crisis in Syria, a mission undertaken by the joint envoy Lakhdar al-Ibrahimi. As for Yemen, the Security Council has called in October 2011 to the necessity of reaching a political settlement based on the initiative presented by the GCC countries. And this is what paved the way for reaching the agreement on the mechanisms of implementing the initiative with the support of the GCC countries. The United Nations and the GCC are still working together hand in hand and speaking with one voice, despite the fact that the Security Council remains divided on other issues. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, there are best practices in this field and good examples of active regional cooperation which have been developed to enhance the role of mediation and dispute settlement. I would like to allude to some in brief. The African Union started an innovative structure which acts as an early warning system and a council of elderly and wise. The UN has supported this effort through its mediation efforts and the support it provided through the African Union, as a result of which meetings were organized every 6 months to enhance the role of mediation. Also, the establishment of an office of the UN with the African Union has played a major role in enhancing this cooperation in this and other fields pertaining to peace and security. It is a pioneering effort indeed, and one worthy of consideration to enhance our cooperation. Since the establishment of the GCC in the year 1981, the member countries have managed to enhance and highlight their role as individual mediators, both inside and outside the region. I remember the settlement of the border dispute between southern Yemen and the Sultanate of Oman, and the dispute between Qatar and Bahrain in 86 and 87, and also the role it has played in the first Gulf War, 1979, and the Taif Agreement, which ended the civil war in the Lebanon in 86, and also when Qatar played a mediating role on behalf of the Gulf countries in the Iranian nuclear issue. This, of course, was in addition to the role they played in Lebanon in 2000 and 2008, and the role currently being played in the Yemen through the Gulf Initiative. Of course, this has always been a main feature and a priority on the agenda of the GCC. Supporting peace-building efforts requires the kind of expertise, capabilities, and partnerships in addition to the continuous presence in the field, on the ground. And in this regard, please permit me to mention some lessons I learned through my experience as a special envoy to the Yemen, and as a result of 35 visits I've paid to that country. Peace building requires a presence on the ground. The United Nations has more than 800 members of staff who work in the Yemen, in both north and south, and among some 180 international staff. And at the time when the diplomatic missions began to depart Yemen as a result of the security situation deteriorating, this has pushed us even further to implement the agreement on peace and reconciliation. We know this is engulfed by dangers, but we are determined to help Yemen on its road to democratization and political transformation. We have at the UN exerted all efforts to facilitate the role of mediation between the different factions in Yemen, and that has included the mechanisms of implementation for the Gulf Initiative 2011. And lately, the agreement of peace and national partnership last September. In order to achieve all of this, we have gathered a team of legal advisors to help formulate the legal text, and we benefited and drew on the experiences of another team of experts, and a team of experts also who to help organize elections and facilitate a new electoral register in preparation for the next coming general elections. In addition to all of this, a number of our constitutional experts are currently studying the advice which can be offered to the team in charge of the new constitution, and also implementing parts of the agreement, especially the ones pertaining to disarmament, and also to integrate the fighters into the national regular army. And of course, we will continue our efforts for the political transformation, democratization in Yemen. I have no doubt whatsoever that the apparent desire to work together is a source of strength for all of us, and to enhance our efforts to achieve peace and security. But we have to admit, nonetheless, that sometimes we are confronted by formidable challenges which require further cooperation. The mandates of our organizations are different, and this necessarily makes our approaches different but convergent. We still will strive to discover these challenges to enhance cooperation over them. The United Nations fully realizes that active players in peacemaking and mediation have multiplied. This is a welcome development, and we extend our hand of cooperation to all of them to enhance cooperation. We are at the same time committed more than ever to encourage cooperation to the field of capacity building and benefit from each other's experiences. I invite you to contemplate together to be more innovative in this approach, and I have no doubt that the Gulf Cooperation Council has the capability to utilize its wide contacts network and the expertise to play a leading role in the Arab region and beyond in support of mediation efforts and peacemaking. The Gulf Cooperation Councils together collectively have vast experiences, starting from the Taif Agreement and the Doha Declaration on Darfur, encourages me to think of supporting the idea of establishing a Gulf Center for peace building to provide expertise in legal, political, and mediation efforts in support of negotiations and transitional periods and ending in permanent peace. This can happen through attracting internationally renowned experts from the region and beyond to support peace initiatives and mediation initiatives adopted by the GCC as a community or its members individually. Finally, what the GCC countries have played by way of the role in peacemaking in Yemen 2011 and the launching of the Gulf Initiative encourages me to believe even further in the role of the GCC. This is supported by the insight and the extensive network of contacts enjoyed by the GCC countries. All of this makes me think that it is in a position to act in support of the UN in peace building and mediation efforts. Thank you, and may God bless you all.
تقدم لي اللي جاي ولا اخش انا؟ تقدم اللي جاي قدمه.
Thank you, Dr. Benomar, Your Highness the Deputy Emir, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Now the session will start under the title of the prospects of enhancing cooperation between GCC countries. I invite the panelists to come to the podium. Dr. Ghanem al-Rumaihi from Kuwait, Dr. Anwar Eshki, Director of the Middle East Center for Strategic Studies in Jeddah, Dr. Baqir al-Najjar from Bahrain, Dr. Fatma al-Sayegh from the Emirates University. The session will be chaired by Dr. Abdullah bin Aboud from Qatar University. Please, panelists, come to the podium. Thank you.
يعطيك العافية. Your Highness Sheikh Abdullah bin Hamad al-Thani, Sheikh His Highness Abdullah bin Nasser al-Thani, Prime Minister, distinguished guests, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you. The Gulf region is one of the most vital strategic regions in the world, taking into account a number of considerations. We all know the strategic location, the oil reserve, and the economic importance. The economics of the GCC showed its ability and resilience to face challenges and has got an advanced position in the international arena. Among the top 12 economies in the world, the economies of the GCC will be $1.7 trillion by the end of the year. And this is a percentage of an expected growth, 4.2%. The GCC come at the fifth rank, the fifth in the world in the size, the magnitude of international trade, $1.4 trillion 2012. And also the trust funds of the GCC amount $2.3 trillion, including about 35.4 of the all trust funds in the world, sovereignty funds in the world. And also the GCC has got a homogeneous demographic makeup joined by one historical experience and one geographical location, common borders. In the light of its importance, closely relatedness, there was the importance of one body representing the interests of those countries, interacting with international and regional events and being influenced by them in response to some, obviously, other factors, international and regional. And so the establishment of the GCC was announced during the meeting in Abu Dhabi 1981, and that was the foundation meeting where the statute of the GCC was signed to achieve cooperation among the 6 countries of the GCC and more coordination and integration, enhancing and deepening links between the peoples of those countries, and also establishing common projects and similar systems in various areas which would enhance the interests of all those countries and their values. The GCC has made many achievements in the GCC and the neighboring Arab countries for the establishment of a free market and then unity to achieve the GCC citizenship, in addition to complementation, integration, cooperation, such as railway network product and the single currency, in addition, obviously, to political cooperation and the establishment of economic and political entity and international negotiations, which would serve the interests of the region. There are also many failures, obviously, which is common in common joint regional work. For the GCC has the credit for overcoming many challenges, economic and political, but also is going through a real challenging period, given the so many variables, international and regional alike. And the Doha summit now, and we are hoping that this summit will overcome those challenges by enhancing the common work among the GCC countries in the light of the challenges witnessed by the region. The focus will be on the next summit, which would attach special importance to this forthcoming summit. Will require a lot of wisdoms and seriousness in achieving making many achievements in the path of the GCC. Given this background, this brief background, it's our pleasure in this seminar where we're talking about the prospects of cooperation development for the GCC that we touch on in discussing this topic from 4 main angles or themes. The first one, assessment of the path taken by the GCC in economics and political work. Second, the challenges facing the GCC countries. The third of which, a means of enhancing the cooperation in its political, economic and social work to achieve the common interests of the peoples of the countries. The fourth theme is the Doha Summit. And in this seminar, constellation of thinkers and experts in political centers are taking part, and in which each of the following Dr. Mohammed Ghanem al-Rumaihi, Professor of Sociology at Kuwait University, Dr. Anwar Majid Eshki, Director of the Middle East Center for Strategic Studies in Jeddah, and Dr. Bakr al-Najjar, Professor of Sociology at the University of Bahrain, and last but not least, Dr. Fatima al-Sayegh, Professor of History and Society at the UAE University. And then we very quickly we move on to the first theme of the symposium, ladies and gentlemen, the first of which is the assessment of the work of the GCC in economic, social, and political fields. And I have a number of questions I'd like to put forward, and I would invite you to answer them, the first of which, has the GCC succeeded or failed in achieving its main objectives? What is the greatest success, or the greatest failure for that matter? Do you think this result is a natural one? Does it meet the aspirations of the leaders of the GCC countries and also the expectations of the peoples? We start with Dr. Mohammed. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of God, the Beneficent, the Merciful. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers of this distinguished gathering, and I think that, of course, we'll be more knowledgeable when we leave this lecture hall after the conference. I initially thought that the points that I was supposed to talk about, a number of topics, but it seems that this has changed in the last minute, as I understood. Now it's required to respond to the questions. Okay, if you just give me a couple of minutes or 3 minutes to just give a brief introduction, in, which might be necessary introduction in this respect. My guess is that the GCC societies have not gone through what they've gone through, or in other words, there's no Arab society has witnessed or gone through this, what was witnessed by the GCC countries. It happened along one generation of relative isolation, relative poverty, to become the countries, rich countries, and also integrated with a globalization. So in one generation, this has been apace the economic, political, and social reality as we witness it now. They actually caused a great deal of confusion to society. And this is the first point I'd like to make. The second of which is that for a long time in this region, we have been under some sort of guardianship or the protection of the British forces in 1970.
Tutelage.
Huh?
Tutelage. Tutelage.
So, and then there was the Iran-Iraq war, and the GCC came along. So the GCC societies, as I described them, societies have been engendered, brought forth by these developments. As Dr. Attiyah, he actually alluded to that point. There's an unbalanced growth within the GCC, and the lack of cohesion in the system, lack of balance, and lack of coherence. There is education in terms of quantity, but many of us need to be seen in terms of quality as well. Women in the Gulf as well, they face a number of obstacles, or major obstacles, and I'm talking about the GCC. Of course, there are variations from one society to another within GCC. The state, or the project of the state, is not mature. Until we take the GCC to reach, take it to higher prospects, we have to concede partial ceding of what we call the sovereignty. This is the problem we've been talking about. How can we move to a union or a confederation while new societies? This is one of the real problems that we are facing. In spite of all the challenges that we are witnessing, the GCC, they have been talked about a lot within the GCC framework, but I think the GCC has not established innovative institutions. And I've already written about this many times. We have a general secretariat. A lot of credit goes to it, but it needs to be developed to a different model. Excuse me, we'll talk about some of those issues in the forthcoming questions. But if you could just answer me very briefly, has the GCC, in your opinion, succeeded to achieve its objectives? Of course not, it has not. It has not succeeded, and when we say its objectives, Mr. Attiyah talked about the overall objectives, the main documents of the GCC, but succeeded in a number of steps, the cumulative ones, in terms of quantity, but in terms of quality, to my mind, we still have a problem. That obviously the GCC is a system which was established at the outset for external security, but the problem facing now, the internal security only, but also internal as well, the lack of balance of growth in those societies. That's why I call them that societies are in progress, and we don't know exactly whether they are being born, if you like. We don't know whether this child that will be born will be healthy or will have some congenital deformities. So what are the areas of failure? The failure that the popular thinking precedes the official one, the elite and the Gulf, thought very early on. We take, for example, the bridge causeway between Bahrain and Saudi Arabia. What I found from my own research, the statement by King Saud in Manama talking about the causeway between Bahrain and Saudi Arabia. For 43 years ago, over the past 43 years, we're talking about, and when Qatar, Bahrain and Qatar as well, and this is an issue as well, and that has not been realized. So there are a number of issues which are, it's necessary for us to look at them seriously, not for emotional reasons, but for out of interests. From the interest point of view, it's interest-oriented. These countries are small, cannot have maneuverability, strategic maneuverability is limited, and the risks and dangers facing those countries are similar to a large extent. And also, there are the Gulf, the disagreements among the Gulf countries over the past few recent years have had an impact on the Arab area as well, and this has helped us in the Gulf to stop some of the developments in the Arab world. Dr. Fatma, do you agree with Dr. Mohammed that the GCC has failed to achieve its objective, especially in relation to the GCC citizenship? At the outset, if we look at the charter of the GCC, we'll find that the statute of the GCC stipulates a cooperative formula leading to the grand union or unity. So to establish a kind of cooperative formula, that's why it was called, instead of unity, is GCC Cooperation Council. Now we look at the second component. Has the GCC achieved, met the expectations, aspirations of the peoples and the regimes of the GCC? And actually, the achievements of the GCC do not meet the aspirations of the GCC peoples. I agree with Dr. Rumaihi that the aspirations of the GCC peoples are larger than the aspirations of the leaders, not limited by any obstacles or borders. If we look at the successes of the GCC, they're not many, they're not large, but the successes could be perhaps in terms of cooperation and cultural treaties and agreements and economic ones, we could say that the GCC has made some success. The failure perhaps is larger than the success, as evidenced by the invasion of Kuwait, which was testified to the failure of the system of the GCC. The GCC had to rely on an external force to liberate Kuwait. So where is the defense force, the common defense force for the GCC? So if we look at the achievements of the GCC, we'll find that the failures, in actual fact, are larger than its successes, and the aspirations of the peoples of the GCC are larger, reaching ultimately to the unity that's called for by the peoples of the GCC. Do you think the glass is half full or half empty? Do you think in relation to the GCC? Or do you think it's half empty? Has anything been achieved from the objectives of the GCC? First of all, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillah, peace be upon the Prophet and his companions and his household. If we look at the GCC, the steadfastness of the GCC over these years, that's a success in itself. This steadfastness, over this period, is a positive indicator and a good one for the success of the GCC. And if we look at the GCC Charter, we'll find, or the statute, we'll find that it's a treaty, unity, which has fulfilled all the objectives or what's expectations. The other one, the federal unity, remains. The unions, whether a binding obligation or confederations or treaty ones, are between governments. And here we find the great sensitivity in relation to sovereignty and otherwise. But the federal union or the confederation comes to fulfill the desires of the peoples. So if we take the US, for instance, we find that in the preamble of the Constitution says that the peoples of the states, the 13 states, and they put forward the strategic objective to achieve peace and prosperity for the people of the US. That required the three leaders, intellectuals, to have a dialogue, Mason and the other who actually did that, until they came to show to the people the importance and the significance of that union. So the federal union requires a constitution, and the constitution is the one that governs all. So if we move on if we stay at the stage of the GCC, the GCC, there's a great prospect that would face many challenges and problems. But we move on to the unity, they will move on to democracy, and move on to many other issues, foremost amongst which the existence of a constitution governing all countries. So we have to think carefully about this kind of unity, and that was felt by his Saudi king, his custodian of the 12 shrines, and agreed upon by the leaders of the GCC in this respect. So it's high time that we moved not to look at problems themselves, but to lay the foundation, a new foundation. And the forthcoming summit, I hope, will discuss this issue, because if we look at the federal union of the US, has been there for many years, so we need to have a union amongst us. If we have such a union, then the Gulf, the Arab Peninsula, will have a strategic system, and this strategic system will face all the challenges that we might come in the future. So we're now facing for the future, aspiring to the future, not crying over the past. And this is my view.
Thank you, Dr. Anwar. So, in your opinion, the union is the magic formula for achieving political democratization, social justice, security, and the like. What Dr. Anwar is calling for, it seems, is the federal union. There is a dilemma in understanding this, because what this means is the end of states as we know them and establish one entity, and unlike a confederation. Dr. Bakr, what do you think? I don't think this kind of approach is achievable in reality. Part of this has been alluded to by Dr. Rumaihi already, that there is still clinging to the question of national sovereignty at the level of these countries, these member states of the GCC, and there isn't that great desire towards giving up even partially this sovereignty. So therefore, the question of total integration may not be achievable. Total integration, or even what we're talking about here, which is not possible to a large extent unless the state itself as a controlling device of society is developed. The other question is there has to be social awareness, not based on emotional considerations, which feels that this union is a necessity. Personally, I do not feel that there is such a sentiment. There is some sort of a feeling towards a union of some sort without the necessary awareness of the nature of this union. I think these questions hinder the union. Maybe another alternative can be to push aspects of cooperation in the short term at least, and maybe this is on the condition that this kind of push should be accompanied by developing government agencies and develop the societal awareness of the importance of that. Thank you. Maybe we can deal with this later. A quick response, please. How does the ordinary citizen in the Gulf Cooperation Councils view the situation, and can movement through personal IDs and others has achieved enough in the eyes of the ordinary citizens? In my estimation, the vision of leadership is very important. Here, I disagree with a federal union, but a confederation maybe is closer to what I have in mind. And we really need to think this up deeply. And at least for my generation, we have witnessed the debate when the United Arab Emirates was established, and there was a lot of change, a lot of resistance. Ras Al Khaimah did not join until 6 months later. No, 2 months later, Dr. Fatima says. He says, anyway, today we have an identity called the citizenry of the UAE. This is the first point. Secondly, are there any dangers threatening us as small countries? The answer is yes. In politics, as everybody knows, you can expect the unexpected. For example, you go to bed at night a Kuwaiti and wake up an Iraqi, or go to bed at night as a Kuwaiti and wake up as an Iranian. This is a serious question we ought to contemplate. Maybe someone like Aristotle, for example, said that the whole is bigger, larger than the sum of the parts. We should understand that there is strength in numbers, as they say, and if we combine together and produce a larger block, this will make us stronger. But the problem, in my opinion, and maybe in the opinion of others, is based on a question made up of 4 words. Why don't they listen to us? Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Fatima, as a Gulf citizen, do you think the GCC has achieved for you any ambitions? For the ordinary citizen, I think more often than not, the ordinary citizen does not see in the GCC any benefit apart from when they move from one airport to another, they see a sign saying this way for the GCC citizens. But for the business community who seek the abolishment of customs barriers and joint investments, etc., see major benefits of this. We as academicians, we call for one strong union which represents us before the world. And the GCC, in the opinion of some, and as was alluded to this morning, is seen as a hope or a catalyst to lead the Arab world in the right direction. But views regarding the GCC vary depending on how much benefit people get out of it. Dr. Anwar, do you want to add as a Gulf citizen? As a Gulf citizen, undoubtedly, the ambitions citizens harbor far exceed what governments achieve. Governments' hands are tied because of certain policies and international influences. But if to achieve what people want, we have three approaches: either a federal arrangement, confederate, or total union. And Europe, for example, has achieved a lot, but it's also threatened with disintegration because it has not developed into a federal state. The United Arab Emirates, as we see, requires semi-autonomous arrangements for the member constituents, but this should be governed by constitution. If we want to listen to the desires of and wishes of our people, we should move towards federalism. Any nation which enjoys security and social justice can face up to any challenges. We cannot achieve that unless and only through a federal union. Thank you. Dr. Anwar tries always to take us to the question of federalism, and he insists us. I think this will be one of the reasons why the whole project will collapse. This means the different countries will be ultimately melting down and surrendering everything into the hands of one major power. But to have a confederate arrangements based on cooperation we find difficult. So what about a federalist arrangement? That will be even more difficult. Dr. Bakr, you as a citizen, do you think the GCC has achieved for you some of your ambitions at least? And do you think the solution lies in the federal arrangements? The Council has achieved, we have to be honest, has achieved some ambitions and some wishes. And of course, as is the case always, people's ambitions far exceed those of governments, and the Council has achieved a lot of facilitation in the movement of people, customs tariffs, and the openness towards internal investments, also the smooth movement of citizens, people, and also some security and military arrangements, but at the same time has not made the important step of involving the citizens in the decision-making process. They established a consultative council, but from the day of its establishment until now, it hasn't changed. We have to develop this concept further to make the citizens feel that they have a role to play in the decision-making process. When you look at the decisions by the Council and the summit meetings, we see that many of the decisions serve the interest, the common interests of the people, but we see, unfortunately, a lot of them do not see the light of day when it comes to implementation. Why is this so, in your opinion, and how can we manage to solve this problem, and what mechanisms can they adopt so that these decisions do not remain unimplemented? For example, when you take the European model, the European model has a few organizations which are supranational, and they have an executive power over the countries themselves and national countries. This is not the situation here in the Gulf, in addition to what we just said, that the question of sovereignty is blown out of proportion, and this is something we have to deal with. It's enough sometimes for one bureaucrat to bring into complete halt a major decision by the Council. Of course, we always have powers pushing from behind and powers pulling from the front. For as far as the challenges faced by the GCC, whether from the neighboring countries or internal threats or the threat of terrorism and the like, this calls upon us always to move more towards a state of the union. For example, if there are ambitions and good things we look forward to, then this cannot be achieved unless through dialogue between the GCC countries and GCC peoples. In my opinion, in order to bypass all these problems, there are countries who believe in the union and other countries are hesitant. So why shouldn't there be a union for the countries which agree to the union itself and formulate it in a proper way? And then at that time, if other countries find that this union fulfills the ambitions and the desires of people and it's beneficiary, and then they can join in. The United States started with 12 states and became 13, then ended up with 50 or 51. So therefore, it's not a condition that all should be agreeable right from the start. And as Dr. Bakr has said, there are sensitivities when it comes to sovereignty and issues of the economy. And these things we have to go beyond, because the union means giving up sovereignty at the small level for the sake of sovereignty at the larger level. Dr. Fatma, has the time come now for the GCC countries to expand and allow for other countries from outside the region to join? And are there necessarily, is there a contradiction between this expansion on the one side or increase the levels of cooperation? I think in its current form, the GCC, if it's expanded, it will bring in more failure. It has tried in the past to join more countries to its membership, like Morocco and Jordan and others. The result was catastrophic for all parties concerned, and I think the Council in its current makeup, if it tries to expand, it will doom itself into failure. And I think there is a large number of policy makers, decision makers in front of me. I say it's the council should work on how to put its own house in order and increase the powers of some of its institutions to enable it to fulfill its role and for which it was established. Dr. Mohammed, Doha is preparing to receive the Gulf Summit in a few days' time. And it's noticeable that Jordan, Morocco, and Yemen have been invited to join the preparatory meetings. What does this indicate to you? Abud, you seem to change your questions. I prepared some answers, but you keep changing the route. I don't like surprises, but I will answer you nonetheless. First of all, I wanted to allude to what Dr. Rahman al-Attiyah said. He is a man of experience, and no one can inform you like an expert can, as they say. And this also alludes to the first question. What I would like to add here is that there is a difference between a politician and a leader. The leader looks far beyond and can bypass side issues. Politicians want to appease those around them and those who elect them. In 1981, we were lucky to have leaders. We still have them, and we still need them to take us further, to overpass the uncertainty, because if you have some money to spare to buy an apartment somewhere and get the nationality of another country, this means that there are uncertainties surrounding the feelings of our people. But if countries like Iran, Yemen, and Morocco, they used to play football with us and beat us sometimes. I mean our Yemeni brothers. So therefore, there is no harm in widening the circles further if there is here a sort of meeting of interests and areas of cooperation. There is no harm. I don't see any harm in that, because it's obvious that we all are confronted by challenges, and we can do with the support we can get, and maybe these countries can play such a role. Morocco, Morocco has some 30 million people. Egypt is another heavyweight and can cooperate with us. Did you say Yemen too? Not with the Houthis, I disagree, but with others, yes. I'll surprise you with another question. Now there is talk of the center of gravity shifting towards the Gulf areas, and people expect the Gulf countries to play a leadership role in the Arab world. Let me continue the question first. Can we safely say that the Arab GCC countries are playing the role of a counter-revolution against the Arab revolution countries, and therefore hindering the process of change and social justice and trying to turn the clock backwards? Has this difference of opinion and position contributed to this kind of Cold War? This is not a surprise. You now asking me to deliver an entire paper. I have a theory which says that the Gulf countries bought a ticket for national a lottery, but didn't come up trumps, as they say. Now the Gulf countries can play a leading role, but in my opinion, it's best that if I have any opinion to pass, we should not get involved in internal problems of other countries. People should decide their future for themselves. But having said that, at the beginning of the Arab Spring, the Gulf people played the role of a catalyst, and we directly interfered in the process of change, whether in Libya or other countries. But the inter-Gulf differences have hindered the Arab effort in general and the Arab League's efforts. I hope after the Gulf Summit this week, the Gulf countries will end up with some sort of an agreement, if not total agreement, some sort of convergence, maybe. If that happens, I think some Arab countries will join the process. You telling me that this particular moment in time, it's a moment for the Gulf countries to play a leading role. This is one, and also the Gulf is like the lungs through which the world economy is breathing. And even if we bring our positions closer, not necessarily in total unanimity, but we're running out of time fast, but I will not depart my place without asking this question. If you have something to say to the, by way of suggestions to the leaders attending the summit meeting, and what will be your message to them in 2-3 words, starting with Dr. Fatima? I will suggest to them, if I was in their shoes, first of all, to find a mechanism to solve the problems between the Gulf countries so that we will not need to rely on outside help. This is important for us as peoples and regimes. Thank you. Dr. Anwar, do you want to add? Of course, we must not try to solve our problems away from the regional problems and the world problems. We are part of this world. We influence it as much as it influences us. We cannot remain as pawns in the game. We want to have our say and to prove that we exist. And now, in the new Middle East is changing from depending on leaders into depending on peoples. This means a change towards democratization, but the GCC countries are considered the economic base now for the Arab nation as a whole. So therefore, it should be strong, and it should move towards unity and democratization. Dr. Bakr, very briefly and in a nutshell, we must think seriously of developing the consultative council and benefit from what Jamal Benomar has said about playing a mediation role in dispute settlement. And internally, we must work seriously to establish a Gulf tribunal of some sort which can have an executive role at the level of GCC countries. In 2 words, Your Highnesses, we are in the age of Twitter. Please beware. Thank you very much. Now we come to the conclusion of this session. Thank you very much, Your Highness, the Deputy Emir, for honoring us with your gracious attendance of the session. Thank you to all our panelists and participants. Enjoy your stay in Doha. We depart now with the hope of seeing you tomorrow and the day after for the rest of the sessions of this conference. Thank you.